And let's see if we can start sharing PyCharm and Chrome and get to today's slides. All right, it's a couple of seconds before 4, but good enough. We'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So hopefully there was enough meat in Monday's lecture to get you started on Lab 6 yesterday. Preliminary reports I got from Kevin and Mariah were pretty good. Today we're going to go through functions in more detail, hopefully a bit slower with some code that's a little bit more developed. And we're going to show you some more things about functions and how they work and how they're an important part of any programming language, really, but especially Python. Administrative notes, only thing I have, I do owe one person. There was one person who took the test late, and I still haven't graded it. Yes, I'm aware of that. I apologize. I'll get to it as quick as I can. Next week is spring break, as you're aware. Enjoy it, but please be safe. We have a long way still to go in this semester. The last day of class isn't until the 12th of May, so we're not there yet. Come back from class ready to work, or come back from your break ready to work. The assignments get a little longer in the second half of the course. Now, they're not necessarily going to get any harder. You've already got all the fundamentals of coding and programming and computer science, a lot of them mastered already. You're pretty good at this stuff. So you should be able to do it, but they're longer. They involve multiple functions. They involve some interesting algorithms. They involve putting a lot of stuff together, but longer. So enjoy your break, but come back ready to work. That's the only administrative note I have. What I want to do now is come to the return statement. We're going to talk some more about scope. We're going to talk about some various things with functions, with what you can and can't do. But for the first part of class, I want to talk about what a function returns, and specifically the return statement. Now, I mentioned on Monday that in this class, a function in the mathematical notion of a single output for a specific input, in this course, we enforce a rule that a function can only return one value. Now, that one value can be a list, so it's not like you can only return a single integer or a single string. You can return a list. Python lets you do some truly bizarre things with returning different values from a function, and we don't want to get into that. That's for 291 if you take it. So we kind of enforce a syntactic rule here that we only allow you one value returned in a function, but it can be a list. Okay, let's go to PyCharm. Now, the first file we're going to look at is not yet on GitHub. There is one file we're going to look at for the second half of class that's already on GitHub. This file is not. What I want to start with is a function that reverses a word. It takes as input a string, which we will call this parameter. Remember, the parameter are these things in the parentheses in the function definition. It takes one parameter, which is a string, and in this function, we call that word. Okay, again, now, just like in an if, just like in while, just like in for, in Python, indentation is key. Indentation tells you and tells Python what is part of the function and what is not. So the function definition starts with the word def, D-E-F. Everything that is part of that function is indented. If nothing is indented, if this I equals 0 and the other code were to be up against the left boundary of my editor, I would have problems. This would not work right. Python would say there's no text for this function. So everything that's indented, at least one, in this case tab stop, is part of this function. When we unindent, that tells Python that's the end of the function. Now, in this, what we're going to do is we're going to take a word, a string, and we're going to invert it character by character. We're just going to write it backwards. So it's a fairly simple It's a fairly simple while loop. Initialize I to 0. Initialize a new string that is an empty string. This is just a quote, 2 quotes with nothing between them, so it's just an empty string. And now I'm going to run through the while loop, and each time I'm going to take the next letter from the end of the initial word and append it to my reversed word. So in other words, the way this works is I start with an empty string. My reversed word is an empty string. I go to the last letter in word, which is what this is, and append it to the string. That's what string plus, remember when you're dealing with plus, string is concatenation. I use append, I probably should not. This is not a list, it's a string. I concatenate, is the technical term, this letter onto my reversed word. And then I increment I. And as I do this, the first time through the loop, this takes the last letter in word. The second time, it takes the next to last letter. The next time, it takes the third from last letter. And as you can see, it goes through each iteration of the string one at a time. And it concatenates it to my string that's my reverse word. And so when this is all done, then I increment I so that I don't have an infinite loop. I have something that'll terminate. When this is all done, the word reversed is reverse word. Now, in this function, there is no return statement. And it turns out in Python, this is valid. We say this function returns nothing. It returns a special value called none. Okay, so first let's make sure this code works. I believe it does. But let's come down here. I have multiple functions in this code, so I'm not going to just run the program. I've got several things. There's my function. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the function reverse word Maryland. And let's see if I did that correctly. And you can see that this is what it does. It runs through and it goes through this function and tells me the word parameter that was passed in was Maryland, reversed is, and this is the result of that string op. So this function takes any arbitrary word and reverses it. If I say reverse word Virginia, you get that. If I say reverse word 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I get that backward. And if I try something like reverse word the integer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it gives me an error because it says that's an integer, not a string, and it has to match up. Okay. What we talked about last time was that in the call, right here, in this call, this in the parentheses is called an argument. This that I'm highlighting, Maryland or Virginia or whatever is called an argument. An argument is the value we pass to the function, and it is matched to the parameter. And the arguments and parameters are matched in order, and there have to be the same number, and they have to be the same type. So in this case, since it's obvious from the text of the function that the parameter is a string, what we're calling also must have a string. So anything that uses reverse word and has an argument that's a string will work fine. Anything that's an argument that's not a string, in this case an integer, will fail. So function definition, parameter, function call, argument, return. In this case, it returned nothing. Okay. And so if I wanted it to, I could say return, and it helps if I spell return right. It's a reserved word. You have to spell it right. The string done. Okay. And if I run that function, now I'm getting back done. And now I call reverse word with argument Maryland. It still works the same, but it also gives me back this return value. This done was printed because that is returned by the function. The return is caused by this statement, return done. That said, okay, I returned done. And so the main program, not knowing anything better to do, printed it out and said, okay, we got done back. The return statement is the value that comes back from the function. Here's a more straightforward one, and let me fix a typo in this before I try to run it, or we're going to have a problem. Okay. PyCharm is enough to give me these errors, tell me I have these errors. Okay. Now, I have the function def fourth root, which takes one parameter, num, which is an integer or a float. Looks like it's most likely a float, but I'm willing to bet an integer will work. Let's come down here and run that. And now let's call it answer equals fourth root 81.0. Now, something to the fourth root is just that number raised to the 1/4 power, number raised to the 0.25 power. You could also make it the square root of the square root. We'll get into how to do that later, but it's just the fourth root is to the 1/4 power. And so now we call the function, and you'll notice it did the math. It returned that value 3. I'll show you how in a minute we know that. This print statement did not get executed. Here's a rule about functions and return statements. In this previous example, I put the return statement when it was there at the very end of the function. Here, I put the return statement in the middle. When a return statement is executed, the function ends right then and right there. No further statements are going to be executed in the function ever. I could have 100 lines of code down here. Okay, I have 200 lines of code down here. Once that return statement gets executed, that's it for the function. The function is done. Okay, so in this case, I have a return. I put the print down here. It doesn't do me any good. Okay, if I want to see that this actually worked, I have to ask Python, what's the value of answer? The value of answer is 3.0. So remember, answer was set by the call. What's the fourth root of 81? Well, the fourth root of 81 is 3. 3 to the 4th power equals 81. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 9 is 3. So 81 to the 1/4 power is 3. That's how we get this answer. The code actually works correctly. It assigns the value to this statement. Whenever I have a return value in a function, if I want to use it, I can assign it to some value in an assignment statement. Let's go back to the slides and see if I can maybe make that clear. The return statement passes values from the function back to the main program or back to the calling function. We're going to illustrate that. Whoever called this function is going to get the value back from the return statement. And again, the syntax is just return variable name, whatever variable name. You can use parentheses. You can put the variable name in parens if you want. You don't have to. Generally in Python, we don't use parens around the variable name in the return statement. And again, for our class, we return one value in a function. Okay, if you want to use that value that's returned, you do it in the calling program. Here's a factorial case. I'll do it in a minute. In this case, like in the fourth root example, okay, we calculated the fourth root, then we have the value back in the main program. Here we have a factorial routine that calculates the factorial of anything and then returns it. Okay, so with this return statement, return product says return this value, and then in the calling program, you take that value and you assign it to something. Okay, and let me give you a couple of examples of that. Let me come down here. I can real quick reproduce factorial. It takes one parameter, which is going to be an integer num, and it helps if I spell factorial right, or this isn't going to work. Okay, product equals 1 for I in range num. Product times equal I, return product. That's my function, right? That's my factorial function. And now in the main program, if name equals main, this tells Python this is now my main program. If I just say factorial of 5, now 5 factorial is 120. Okay, 5 factorial is 120. So this code will run. And it actually calculates 120. You have to take my word for it because I didn't do anything with it in the main program. In the main program, I got this value back 120. I didn't do anything with it. If I want to do something with it, I have to use it. I can say fact equals factorial of 5. Okay, and now I can look and see what's the value of fact. Where did I mess up? It has a value of 0. It should not have a value of 0. It should have a value of 120. Okay. Factorial, product equals 1 for I in range product times equals I. Let's make sure we're doing this. Debug. This should print out the various values. This will tell me where my error is. And I got a 0. Oh, okay. Silly me. Remember, Python always starts in this case with I equals 0. And once I multiply something by 0, I'm going to be 0 forever. And so I have to start at 1. So for I in range of 1 to num, that's why. This did not work the first time because with the for loop, the first time I ran, the iterator value had a 0 in it, and 0 times anything is 0. What's the value of factorial now? 24, right. Because I stopped here, that's a coding error, plus 1. And now this actually works. We have correctly calculated 5 factorial, something you've known how to do since about 4th or 5th grade. But it's easy. We learn how Python calls the functions. This function returned a value in the return statement. If I ran the function and didn't use that return value like I did the first time, cool, the function ran, but I didn't do anything with the return value. That's okay. I don't have to have a return value. If I want to use that return value, I can assign it to something. I can just print something. So let's run that. There we go. 6 factorial is 720. So that is the return statement. You use it in the function return, in this case product, then I can use it in the main program or wherever this was called from. I don't have to. If I don't use it, I don't use it. I can use it in arithmetic. I can use it directly with the print. I can use it however I want. It's a value that you get from the program. Okay. The fourth root of a positive number, we've already done that. We called it and we got a return of the answer. In that case, I use parentheses. Again, we generally don't. Now, this actually is an incorrect version of the reverse word algorithm. So ignore this code. Use the code that's in PyCharm is the actual right. What I want to do is, again, point out the parts of the function. The definition, def, title, parameters, indent, the code. And again, in this case, reverse word does not return anything. It just executes. If I want it to return something, then I can insert, let me double check what I did here. Okay. Here's a case with the correct reverse word function. So what we'll do is we can run it as part of a loop. I'll get to that in a minute. But what I want to do is show there's a different way to do this. Okay, so I've already got that. Now let's go to PyCharm with this code. And I'm going to have to edit it, so hold on just a second. The reason I have to edit it is because when you do the code in Google Slides, it inserts smart quotes, and PyCharm, Python, and the like, being straight ASCII or UTF-8 encoding, don't recognize smart quotes, so it tells you there is a syntax error because you're using the wrong blasted quotes. And I always forget I have to change those before I actually put the code in PyCharm, which is why the longer programs I put in PyCharm before the thing. Okay, I should already have reverse word in this specific console. So let's see if this already runs the way it is. EOL while scanning, where did I miss my double quotes? Now, that error message means I didn't have double quotes somewhere. Let's fix that. Okay, now let's run that. Okay. This is just calling a function in a loop, which you can see it does. But what if instead of printing out the result in the function, what if I wanted to do something with it in the main program? What we're going to do now is we're going to copy this reverse word function. We're going to come down to the bottom. This is going to be an entirely new thing. We're going to call this mod reverse word so that they keep separate in the code if you want to run these. And now what I'm going to do is, instead of this print statement right here, I'm just going to comment that out. I'm going to return and you have to spell return right, reversed word. Now, that's the function. The main program is going to get this back. So here, I'm going to take my code in the main program. Now, because this is unindented, Python knows that this is not part of the function. This is unindented. It starts over here. Therefore, this is not part of the function. What I'm going to do is our word equals, fix the typo, reverse word of critter, print our word. Let's call it critter our word. Okay, and now when I run this, you can see that what we've done, I called the wrong function. There we go. All right, so by using the return value, what I've done is effectively the same thing, except now I have the value back in the main program rather than just having it printed in the function and then it's gone away because it wasn't returned. That gets to scope, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. What happens is when I return the value, I have it in the main program. When I don't return the value, I don't. Okay, let's go back to the slides for a couple of things. This is just a simple case where we've edited, we've put in a loop, and we've used the return statement to send the value back. This slide is the point I was making earlier. A function stops executing once it once a return statement is executed. Now, when we say when it's executed, it means if you have an if else. If you have an if else, you may have a case where you stop and return early and you don't do a loop, but in another case, you have to do a whole bunch of stuff in a loop. So just because there's a return statement in the code body doesn't mean you stop. You stop when you execute that return. Okay, and this was the illustration I gave earlier where we have return and then we have a print statement, and the print statement as described in the comments is never going to be executed because as soon as this return statement gets executed, that's it, the function's done. Using it again. Now, remember, we're talking here functions you're writing. There are a lot of built-in Python functions that we use. Length, len, is a function. It's a built-in function from Python. It returns a value that's the number of elements in either a list or a string. Okay, and you can use it when you say if length sum list is greater than 2. What that is it calls the function length, and it calls the function with a specific argument, sum list. We don't have to see what the code is that runs the length function. The length function is already coded. It's included with Python. Everything I know of comes with it. You don't care what the code is. You just know here's how it works. And then you can use it in your program, just like you use the return value from a function you wrote. You use the return value from reverse word. You use the return value from fourth root. You can use that return value any way you want by using it in a Boolean, by assigning it, by printing it, by doing whatever. So just as with functions you write in a built-in function, you use that return value however you want. Yeah. Again, the only place you can't use the return value is on the left side of an assignment statement. And what I mean by that is you cannot say length of some list gets assigned to, I don't know, x plus 5. Not permitted in Python. This is the return value of a function call. The highlighted length of some list is the return value of a function call. And you cannot use it on the left-hand side of an equal sign, on the left-hand side of an assignment statement. Any place else, you can use a function return value. Here on this side of it equals is the only place you can't. Okay. Now, Python reserved word has a special value, none, capital N, little o n e, which has a special type, none type. Okay. So none is of type none type. It's the only value of type none type. None is what happens when a function has no other return. By default, a function with no return returns none. And you can use that in your programming to look for errors. Okay? If a function does not otherwise return a value, it returns none. That's the convention. If they don't have a return statement, the initial version of reverse word did not have a return statement, that reverse word returned none. If you have a return statement in a function, but it's not executed for some reason, you have an if this is true, return 5, blah, 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 and that never gets executed, then the function returns none. Or you can explicitly say return none. You can tell Python return none. Now, this is a very common programming error, a very common issue that people have. If you expect a function to return something and it doesn't, you will see an error message of something involving none type. Like none type is not iterable. Let's go to PyCharm for just a minute. Let's take the original version of reverse word, which has no return. So reverse word has no return statement, so this is going to return none. Now, I called it initially by just saying reverse word Maryland. Spelling it right. Okay. And this is the original version without the return statement, so this is fine. What if I said S equals reverse word Maryland? Now, that print statement's in the function, so it's still going to get executed. What's the value of S? S has the value none. If we look over here in the debugger over here, we will see that PyCharm is telling us that S right here gets the value none, and S is of type none type. Okay, so this function returns the value none, and if you want to print it out, it'll show you the exact none. Special word, reserved word, uppercase N, little o n and e. So a function which does not return any other value always returns none. Now, suppose that instead of that I have S equals reverse word Maryland, and I don't remember how I wrote the function, and I'm not expecting S to have the actual reversed word. Now I'm going to say S equals the original S concatenated with the word true. Now I'm going to get an error because I thought I had a string and I thought I could just concatenate strings together, add strings together. But you can't add a string to something that is of type none type. Remember, over here, S has the value none. S is of the type none type because this function had no return statement, and since it had no return statement, it returned the value none, and therefore you can't concatenate anything of none type Sorry. You can't concatenate anything of the value none type to a string. Not allowed in Python. You can't, combine strings and other types. So a function which does not return anything returns the value none of type none type. If there is no return statement, the function returns none. If you have an explicit return statement like this, you can return none. This is perfectly valid. It works fine. It's unnecessary in this case. Logically, it's not needed. It doesn't change how the program operates. But you can do that. If you have this specific statement, return none, then the function returns none. If you have a statement that doesn't get executed, or a return statement that doesn't get executed, the function returns none. So none is a special value which comes up when the function has no other return. It often causes errors because you think the function returns a string or an integer or a list or something else. And in fact, you get the value none returned, and then you try to do something and you get some error message like none is not iterable, or none cannot be concatenated to a string, or anything like that. Then you return none. And so from a debugging standpoint, you go and figure out why you thought it was going to return a string or a list when it returned none. You have to figure out why. Okay. When none is used, why Python does this when you use it is it's a brilliant way to do error checking. If you have a function and there's a concern that it may not work properly if the user inputs some ridiculous value, for example, the function might return none. And you can check to see if the function returns none. Okay? And you can take some special action. And I believe the next slide is an illustration of that. Okay, and this is my fourth root function that we've done again. Fourth root, we're going to say, is only defined on positive integers for now. Okay, we just take it to the 1/4 power and we return it. Now, this is a case where this function is defined right now only for positive integers. Okay, the fourth root of a negative integer involves complex numbers or imaginary numbers. It involves I, the square root of -1. Which, is a cool math technique. I think I first took that in group theory, but I'm not positive. At any rate, there is a construct for the root of negative numbers, but let's not go there. We're just going to do positive numbers. And so we check and we say, if you gave me a positive number, then I'll give you back the number to the 1/4 power and I'll return that. If you didn't give me a positive, and 0 is okay, number, then I'm going to return none. And again, here we could have just said return, or we could have omitted this else altogether. Either way, it would have returned none. This is a case where the function, if the user gives the right input, we return a valid answer. If not, we return none. Now, in the main program, we check and we say, prompt the user, enter a number. We cast it to float. And we start a loop. Okay, we use a Boolean flag, done equals false, while not done. Try to find the fourth root of that number that the user entered. If the result of that function here, this is the result of the function. If the result of the function is that special value none, then we need to say, look, that's an error. We were serious. You have to input a positive number. We're just going to keep playing this game. Okay. If this is not equal to none, then by definition, we know it came from this statement, which means we know it's a valid answer. And now we can print out the response. So this is a case where we use the fact that the function returns none to do error checking. We get the original number from the user. We run a loop. If the user input a positive number, we give the user back the fourth root of that number. If the user input a negative number, we say, look, we're sorry, we were really serious about that. Please enter another one. And we'll keep playing this game as long as you will. So the fact that the function returned none tells us that the user did not enter a positive number, and therefore that was an error, and we need to prompt the user again. So what we do with the fact that a function returns none is we use it as an error check. If the function returns none, then generally that means something wasn't quite the way we want it, and we need to write our code to handle that error. Okay, that's the most common way you're going to use none. Python calls, Python is weird because how Python handles those arguments and parameters depends on what type they are. If your argument and parameter are integers, strings, floats, or Boolean, what are called immutable types after spring break, then Python uses a convention that we call calling by value. Not on a test, not something you're going to know, just something I throw in because people who've taken various computer science classes before are used to the term and go, oh, does Python call by value or by reference? If it's an int, if it's a float, if it's a Boolean, if it's a string, Python calls by value. It passes a copy, and you cannot get with the original value. If it's a list, it's completely different. Okay. Then it doesn't call by value. It calls by location, by reference, and that causes some interesting things. So what I want to do is get into scope and illustrate what happens and sort of try to walk through this. This is a slide I put out on Monday's lectures. It's the same slide because this, of course, was covered in the lab, but what I want to do is work through it now. Where can a variable in Python or a function name be directly seen and used? That is called the scope. The scope means from the main program or the functions, where can you access, where can you use, where can you see this variable? What is its scope? Mentioned Monday, in the main program, any variable defined in the main program can be seen everywhere in the program. It is what's called a global variable. But programming convention, 70, 80, however many years of programming history shows that when you start using global variables, when you start using main program variables directly in a function, you get errors, and you get errors that are hard to find, and you get errors that are impossible to debug. So do not access global variables from inside a function. That is a major no-no. We will, in general, deduct big points on that in this class. In general, in your comp sci classes, however many you take, whether it's just this one or if it's 20, don't use global variables. Okay. Use local variables. Local variables are those that are defined in a function, and they can only be seen and used in the functions where they're defined. Now, I want to go back to the example I spent a lot of time working through on Monday and try to make it clearer and or simpler what's going on. So let's write some pseudocode. Pseudocode is the English language description of the code we're going to write. This code, by the way, is already up on GitHub, the one I'm going to go to now. It's called March 10th scope.py, the code samples. If you haven't got it yet, don't worry about it. But what this does is this program computes someone's age in days. Same thing we were doing Monday, except a nicer program. Here's how it works. Ask the user for today's date. ask the user for his or her birthday. Tell the user, we want month, day, year with slashes. We'll talk about that in a second. Calculate the year and day of the year for today and for the user's birthday. What do I mean by that? Well, today is March 10th, 2021. Today is also the 69th day of 2021. How did I get that? There are 31 days in January. There are 28 days in February this year because it's not a leap year. That's 59 days, and today's the 10th day of March. So this is the 69th day of 2021. Suppose somebody was born April 15th. Well, let me use the right syntax. 1989. Okay. That is the 105th day of 1989. So now I can do two things. If I try to subtract 4/15/1989 from 3/10/2021, that's 3 subtractions. That's up to 2 carries. I mean, the 10th minus the 15th, I've got to borrow from the month. March the 10th from April 15th, I've got to borrow from the year. That's complicated. If I just say 105 day of 1989 subtracted from the 69th day of 2021 is easier to get right. It's 2 subtractions, 1 carry. So in my program, at the most, in the program, after I get the today's date and the user's birth date, I'm going to calculate, well, the year was input. I'm going to calculate the day of the year for the 2 birthdays to make this subtraction easier. Okay, because when I did this in the original code on Monday, I mentioned this gets to be a royal pain in the neck when you're subtracting days from days, months from months, years from years, and you've got to borrow. So it's easier to convert to day of year, and then you can just do a direct subtraction. A little bit easier to solve the problem. Now it's just a matter of subtract, print the answer. So that's the pseudocode. This in English is what this file, March 10th scope.py, does. Okay, it calculates a user's current age in days. Now I'm going to define constants. Why am I going to do this? We'll see this more and more as we go on. I'm going to have the user input month / day / year. And I'm going to break that into a list with a split statement. And that's going to give me 3 values. And the months are going to go in value 0 of the list, and the days are going to go in item 1 of the list, and the years are going to go in item 2 of the list. And it's going to be easier to use these constants to reference months and days and years and make sure I've got the right element in the list rather than messing around with remembering 0s and 2s. So these constants I'm just going to use because it'll make the code understandable. Okay. Now, I wrote a bunch of functions, and this is going to be the first version of the solution. I'm going to change it a little bit later on, but I want to walk through the first one. I have a function that calculates the day of the year. It's going to take the month and the day. So if you tell me March the 10th, I'm going to give you back the 69th day of the year in a non-leap year. If you tell me April the 15th, I'm going to give you back 105, and so on. Whatever month and day you give me, I'm going to give you back the number of day in the year, the ordinal date of the year based on that. Okay, I'm not going to mess around with leap years right now. So the way I do this is I just define a Python list consisting of the number of days in the month. January has 31 days. February has 28 days. March has 31. April has 30. May has 31. June has 30. July 31. August 31. September 30th. 30. October 31. November 30. December 31. This list, which I call months, is the number of days in each month of the year. So my routine starts out to calculate what day of the year this month and day are. Obviously, it has to start with the day. I mean, if you tell me it's the 10th of any month, it cannot be less than the 10th day of the year. The 10th of any month can't be the first day of the year. So I have to start by setting days equal to D. The date you passed into me, that parameter, that's the minimum number of day it could be. Now, if you told me that this is January, and this should actually be 1. Let me fix this code. If the month is 1, because January is month 1, then that's it. Any day in January, the day of year is just that day, right? The 1st of January is the first day of the year. The 2nd of January is the second day of the year. The 31st of the January is the 31st day of the year, and so on. If this is January, we're done. Just return the days. The 20th of January is the 20th day of the year, and we're done. Now let's look at this code. I don't have an else here. I don't have else. M is greater than 1. What do we do now? And the reason is because I don't need it. If this is January, if month is 1, and this is January, we're going to return days. And what happens when this statement gets executed, this return statement gets executed? The instant this return statement gets executed, the function stopped. If the month is January, this will never be executed, so I don't have to worry about it. If I ever get to this for statement, okay, if I ever get to this for statement, then I know for a fact that the month is beyond January. M is greater than 1. M is greater than 1 by definition, because if M was 1, if this was January, I executed this statement and I stopped and I never got here. So because I got here, I know that this must not be January. Now, yes, if I wanted to play it safe, I could write else, and then the for loop and what have you. But I don't need it because I know if I got here, it ain't January. So at any rate, what the rest of this code does is, if we're not January, add all the days in the previous month to the day in this month, and then return days. So if month is January, we're going to execute this and stop. This never gets executed. If month is not January, we don't do this. It's an if without an else. We fall down to here. We run this code. We return days, and we're done. So this function calculates the day of the year, tells you for any month of day what number of day in the year it is, and returns it. That's one thing I know I'm going to need. Now, get a date. Get a date is not a social construct. You're not going out to a party in a pandemic. This says ask the user for the date in month, day, year frame form. Ask the user for this. take that string that the user input, now I didn't check, I presume the user's going to be sane here and enter the right thing. And I'm going to take that the user entered, and I'm going to split it on those slashes. Remember, I asked for 03, 10, 2021. This split statement is going to give me the list 03. Now we're still strings. It's going to get rid of the slash 10, 2021. Okay. Yeah, I forgot my. So this split statement takes this, which the user input, and converts it into this list of strings representing the day, the month, the day, and the year. Now, these are strings. I need integers. So this for loop simply converts that list of strings into a list of integers. After this for loop executes, I have the list of 3, 10, 2021, where these are all integers. Okay, so that's what happens here. I prompt the user. I take that single string the user input. I split it on the slash to get this list of 3 strings. I converted those 3 strings to integers because I need to do math with them. Now I have this list of three strings, 3 integers, and then I'm immediately going to calculate day of year. That was this function I already defined. Let's talk about how to calculate day of year. I'm going to call that function here, and this is where my constant comes in. I'm going to call whatever column is months, and I'm going to call whatever is days. Okay. Calculate day of year wants month and day. Well, here, that's date list sub months. And because this is a constant, Python replaces months with 0 and replaces days with 1, but it makes the call. But I can see now more easily from reading my code that I want the months and the days to pass to this other function. I get that result. It goes in days. Now what I have to do is build a list that says what I got from the user is this day, the 69th, the 105th, the 293rd day of the year the user input. And then I'm going to return that. So this return statement returns a list. So what I've got with get a date is the user enters 03/10/2021. I split it on the slashes. I convert the strings to integers. I call calculate the date to figure out what day of the year it is, what ordinal date it is, and then I return this list that consists of this is the 69th day of 2021. The last function I'm going to need is something that calculates how old you are given your birthday and today. And all that does, I don't take into account leap years yet, we'll show how to fix that in a minute, is this calculates how many years you are, how many years old you are, times 365, plus how many days, the day of this year minus the day you were born, okay? And so this calculation right here tells you how many years old you are, how old you are in days, and returns it. So those are the functions. This is the main program, if name equals main. Print statement, tell the user what to do. Print, enter today's date and then your birthday. Today equals get a date. Birthday equals get a date. Now there are no arguments. Remember, get a date up here takes no parameters because I'm not passing anything in. I'm not passing anything into the function, so there's no parameters, there's no arguments, but there is a return, and I need to store that return here, and I need to store the return here. Then, given these two values, I can call calculate age to get the answer, and then I can print it out. So that pseudocode says prompt the user for the birth date, prompt the user for today's date, calculate what day of the year each is so we can do the math and make it easier, do the math, and print out the answer. That's how this program works, using function with no parameter but a return, function with no parameter but a return, function with 2 parameters and a return, and then we're done. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to run this, and since this is all a single program, I could just run this using the run statement. And you'll see my print statement. This program calculates your current age in days, enter today's date, and then your birthday, and you'll see the answer. Please enter the date in the form, month, day, year. Okay, now this is not great. We'll make it better. Today's date, then your birthday. Today's date is 03/10/2021. Enter the other date. Well, yeah, I sort of remember. I can look at the screen. It's not too hard. That's my birth date. So let's go 04/15/1989, which is not really my birthday, but close enough. And we see that then my age in days would be 11,645. And so that's how this program is working with various functions and parameters and returns. Now, I said this isn't really great. We can make it better. Okay, so here's how we'll make it better. Let's comment out this print statement. Let's prompt the user with an appropriate print statement at each time. Okay. Print first, enter today's date. Then print now, enter your birthday. And now I'll go ahead and run this. And this is a little clearer. First, enter today's date, enter the date in the form, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is much easier to understand. This is a better way to construct the program, and it's a fairly simple thing. So let's change it up and say that today is 11/11 in the year 1111. Now enter your birth date. Okay, half the old. We do not now. This program actually will give you negative birth dates, but we're going to presume that the user did something right. And so we say 10/10 in the year 1010. Said user would be 36,896 days old, which makes sense because that's 101 years. Okay. So now this is a little clearer, a little nicer, and we can see how it works. Okay. Now, I got here by saying we'll talk about scope. What's the scope? Well, variables declared in the main program are global. This variable here, today, is a global variable and can be used anywhere in the program. Just for kicks and grins, in def calculate age, I'm going to put in a statement and say print today is, comma, today. Now let's run the program. 11, 11, 11, 10, 10, 10, 10. Your age in days is this, but notice we printed out today is the 345th day of the year 1111. Okay, because November 11th is the 345th day. That's an error. It should not be. It should be the 314th day. We'll fix that code. I'm going one too far in my loop. It's a good way to check. You know, we check the first couple of months. That's easy. We'll fix the other ones. Okay. The point of this right now is this print statement. Blast it. I defeated myself. We'll fix this. I redefined the variable today in the function. and it destroyed my example. Okay, let's run it again. Here we go. It still gave me the same answer. Now, what happened before was in the example, this today that I was referring to, I redefined in this as a parameter, and so it would confuse the print statement would not show what I wanted it to show. This is showing what I want to show. In this function, there is nothing called today. There is no local variable called today. Today, the only today in this program that this function can see is this global variable right here. So that's the value that's printed out. So this is an illustration of the scope. I'm going to comment that out because I don't want to do it anymore. But this uses a global variable from the function. Python will allow that, but it will it leads to errors, so you shouldn't do it. So that's a global variable. Anywhere in the program, from anywhere in the program, you can see a variable defined in the main program. However, the reverse is not true. Let's look at tday. Tday is defined as a parameter. It's local to this function. In the main program, there is nothing called tday. So what should happen is we're going to try to print tday, and what should happen is I should get an error that says in the main program, we have a variable that's not known. Here we go. And this is exactly the case. This has actually worked. The error I was trying to show did in fact occur. tday is not defined. That is caused by this statement right here. I am in the main program. This variable is local to calculate age and cannot be accessed. So that's why this error occurred. Okay, this error occurred because tday is a local variable to this function. It is unknown in the main program. The main program cannot access it. It's outside its scope. The variables that are defined in any specific function can only be used in that function with one exception. So for example, in getADate, I have date list. If I tried to, in calculate age, say print date list is date list, you can see right here, Python is telling me this is an error. This is not a variable defined in this function. It is not within the scope of this function. This is going to fail. So rather than run it, since I'm running low on time, I'm just going to comment that out and illustrate it. Okay. You can only use a local variable in the function where it's defined. You can use variables from the main program anywhere they are global in scope. So that's what we say scope. Main program, global, you can use them anywhere, but don't just pass them as parameters. There be dragons. You can use local variables in a function only in that function. Now, I said with one exception. I have defined this program so that I have 3 functions, each at the high level, and the main program. No functions are nested within each other. But I kind of hinted on Monday that you don't have to do that. You could put a function inside another function. Let's look at calculate day of year. If I look through this, the only place calculate day of year is used is it is called right here within this function. So why don't I, just for kicks and grins, not put calculate day of year at the top? I am going to nest it within this function. So PyCharm is very nice. It very nicely nested and indented things for me. What happens now is the entire function, calculate day of year, is hidden within get a date. You can do this in Python. You do not have to do what I did with the first code where all the functions are at the top level, one after another, and I called what I needed. You know, I called from get a date to calculate day of year. Anyway, it worked, but I can nest a function inside another function this way. From a programming standpoint, calculate day of year is only used from inside this function. It's not used anywhere else. So this will work. Okay, so let's run it to prove it'll work. And it better because it actually worked in my dry run. Let's go back to being serious. Today is 03/10/2021. Now enter your birth date, 04/10/1989. Your age and days is 11,650. So now we're back to a simple program. It works fine. It works fine with calculate day of years nested inside get a date. So you can, in Python, nest one function inside another if you want to. You don't have to. This is just an illustration of the fact that you can, and it will work, provided all the variables are in the proper scope and you don't use anything. Hang on, I got to correct a screw up. Here we go. Now let's cut that. Let's come up here and paste it. And PyCharm is very nice. It, you know, it unindents everything for me. It's now at the proper indentation level and everything is good. And this is what I had originally. So we know that worked. So the illustration of that is within the scope. I could nest one function inside of another. Will you ever do that? You may. You don't have to. You never have to. You can. What's the significance of it? The significance is the scope. A function name is considered to be just like a variable in terms of scope. This function is defined at the top level. So this function name defined at the top level is just like a variable in the main program. It is global in scope. Anywhere in the program can call this function because anywhere in the program knows how to call calculate day of year. If I went back and I cut and I pasted, now calculate day of year is no longer a global function. Calculate day of year can only be called from inside get a date. When you nest like this, the nested function can only be called from here. So we ran this, we know it worked. Let's go back to the main program and say print calculate day of year with arguments the first month, the 10th day. Why is it giving me an error doing this? Spell it. Oh, it's giving me an error because it knows it won't be able to find it. When I do this now, PyCharm will say, as the main program, I don't know what calculate day of year is because it's hidden inside this other function, and now I can't access it. It is no longer global. If I cut this and I put it back here at the top level, like it was, and now I go down to the main program, notice this is no longer an error. Notice this will work. So that was the last point about scope. Let's get back to the slide since I'm essentially out of time. We walked through some examples of variable scope. We showed you that if it's defined in the main program, you can access it anywhere in the program from any function or anywhere else that's a global variable. We showed you that if a function is defined at the top level, you can call that function from anywhere in the program. It's essentially global. We showed you that functions defined and variables defined within a function are local in scope. They can only be accessed from inside that function. You cannot access a local variable from the main program. If you have a function nested within another function, you can't, that hides the function, you can't access that nested function from the main program or from anywhere else. You cannot access local variables from outside that local scope. The reason is because it makes programming too darn hard to get right. Okay. So when we talked about scope on Monday, and you do a little bit of this in lab 6, this is what we mean by scope. Where can you see the variables? Where can you access them? Where can you change the value? The last few slides I don't have time to get to. We'll get to them after spring break. What they deal with is there are a lot of functions that other people have written that are in Python that can be used by anybody, and you can import them into your program and you can use them. And I didn't really think I would get there, but I threw them into the slides anyway. No biggie. We're definitely going to hit those after spring break. So that's it. That is more detail on functions, focusing on the return statement. You can have a return statement where you return a variable name. For our course, we return a single variable, which can be a list. Python will let you return all kinds of variables. It doesn't care. It's okay. You can use the return variable in your program by assigning it to a value, by printing it, by doing whatever. If you do not have a return, if your return is not executed, you will return the value none. The only place you can't use a return value is left side. We'll get there. None is it's a reserved word. It's a special value. It is of type none type. It is the only value of none type. And none means you didn't return anything to this function, which you can use in debugging and error checking. Other than that, you're probably not going to use it. But it's really handy if you're going to debug an error check from your function to see, hey, if this is not equal to none, we're okay. If this equals none, something went wrong, I better fix it. Don't worry about calling it by value right now. We'll get into it. And the rest of the time we spend on scope. Again, where it can be seen. I am past time. Apologies for that, but we covered everything we need. I'll stay around for a little bit. I have about 10 minutes if anybody has any questions. And if not, enjoy your spring break. I will be around during spring break. So if you have any email or Discord or whatever other questions, feel free. I will get to them and I will respond. Enjoy yourself, and we'll see you.